Hi, everyone. Thanks. There is no data in my presentation, so hopefully I'm invited back. This will be maybe a little bit of a change of pace. And I thought that the font, I picked a really nice font for everyone, and when Sam was showing it to me, it seemed like it went away, but maybe it came back. So I'll try to talk. This is a slide that's framed around my career and the organizations I've worked for, but I'm going to try to not talk about myself as much as possible, but I'll start there very quickly. So I was lucky enough to start with Opta when I graduated from college. It was way before they pulled data from FBref, so please don't blame me. ASA, I was trying to give you guys data all the time, so I hope you can back me up. Then Perform acquired Opta around 2015, jumped over there into the kind of commercial side of the business, and then was fortunate enough to join Nashville SC in 2019 ahead of their expansion year in MLS. And across each of these kind of destinations, I think I was able to see data across different lenses. Obviously, Opta, I was collecting data. I was leading kind of the operations, the data collection operations. At Perform, I was selling data, selling products, trying to kind of work on marketing that stuff to different clients. And then obviously at Nashville SC, being more heavily involved in the actual decision-making process, using data, but also just acknowledging the broader web of what goes into a decision at a professional soccer club. So this was me when I graduated school. I mean, that's not actually me, but this was me figuratively. And so, yeah, I was a dynamic midfielder at a Division III school. But I played for most of my life, and I think Opta really kind of opened my eyes to viewing the game in a very different way. I think when you're collecting 1,000+ events live, it definitely allows you to see the game in a more analytical way. It just kind of breaks down the game in a different way than you're used to as a player or a coach. And so there's a couple things that I learned as part of this, and I think all these slides will kind of be framed in the same way. It's just a couple lessons and then kind of how they apply to the professional club space. Data's not fact. And I think the script's flipped a little bit nowadays. There's like this ubiquity of data, not just soccer data, but just like information in general. But soccer data has become so much more prevalent in the last 10 to 15 years. I actually think this is a reminder now that we need to give to non-data people rather than vice versa. I think we talked about players seeing data, coaches going fot mob after games. We really need to control the narrative in terms of what they're seeing, because because of the accessibility of data nowadays, there's this tendency to kind of draw inferences when potentially it's not appropriate, just knowing kind of the limitations of data. And then data accuracy really is about consistency. I can't tell you the amount of times I had arguments with data collectors at Opta around big chances or things like second assists, where they're like, oh, well, he should have scored. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the definition of what a big chance is, the definition of what a second assist is. Your personal opinion about whether a player should have scored or not has nothing to do with that. So at the club space, the reminder for me is acknowledging the limits of data. Obviously, when you're trying to sell data to coaches, it's hard to go in and say, oh, here's something that has all these gaps and limits. So there's obviously a tact to doing that, but it's important that you acknowledge the limits of it. And understanding the definitions. You can't just go in with descriptors, especially nowadays with all the different data providers. A ball recovery means something different for Opta than it does for StatsBomb. Duels are different. You really need to understand what's under the hood when you're communicating it to decision makers. And so then I jumped to Perform. And one of the things that has always inspired me when trying to kind of sell data, obviously at Perform, I was selling it to a bunch of different clients and sectors in the industry, but it's something I hold true to me now, even in the club space, is Apple's marketing philosophy, which I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but there's three kind of key pillars: empathy, focus, and impute. So empathy, when you're selling data, you really need to understand the business. You need to understand how they're making money at the end of the day. And so when I was working for Perform, selling data to digital sites like Yahoo and MSN. It was all about content aggregation, the ad-funded model. This has all changed in the last 10 years, but it was important for me to understand why they wanted data. In the broadcast space, it was all about storytelling, fan engagement. They wanted to keep people tuned in during halftime, pregame, postgame, all about storytelling. And then the pro space, obviously much more around kind of making sound decisions. And so you have to wear different hats when you're selling data. And I think that applies equally to when you're inside a club. You need to know how all these people are making money. What does your coach want data for? What are the scouts using data for? GMs, executive decision makers. I think something that gets overlooked in the club space a little bit is obviously data is used for decision making, but it can be very powerful for internal and external storytelling as well. Definitely internal storytelling to ownership about what's happening. Data can be very powerful in that way. Fans, media, data can be a very powerful tool when it comes to storytelling at a club. It's not just to make better decisions or more informed decisions. Focus, big ideas, have to be careful. I will tell you, when I was excited about my gig with Opta in 2019, I had a ton of big ideas, went through the door and realized that not only are they difficult to execute, but they were perhaps not as important as some of the smaller things. And so, really it's concentrating on the added value. These are things that you won't see published. A lot of the media around the sexiness of analytics, I think sometimes can distract us from what's really important when we're using data and analytics. And so no one will write about this stuff. It's very, very boring, but I think for the most part, you want to think about really where you're adding value. And I think there can be very simple ways to do that. And so, a reminder that innovation is not always the goal. I think this is an important one, especially nowadays, because I think the industry is ramping up. There's a lot of consolidation with vendors. We have two very wonderful vendors here, Skill Corner. You probably hate being called vendors. I hated it too. But Skill Corner and Teamworks, who, disclaimer, Nashville SC is a client of both of them, but their incentives are very different than club incentives. And I think you can very easily get lost in the innovation of the industry versus what a club really needs to do. I think Teamwork's at like a unicorn valuation. They're worth a billion-dollar valuation nowadays. They're going to continue to iterate and develop new products and try to push innovation, which is all fine and good. It's not always the goal. The burden's on them to provide new products, new data that's really going to kind of create added value for what you're doing at the club space. And then Impute, which I think is probably one of the more talked about ones with the Apple marketing philosophy. And it's really around Apple could create the best iPhone, but the idea of it coming in that nice white box and you opening it and you peeling off all these little things, that's very much part of kind of the stickiness of it and why it's so popular. And so I think there's lessons probably we can take in terms of data and analytics and what we're doing in the club. And so I love visualizations, but we have to be careful because sometimes I think they're used as like a shortcut. I think if you're creating a visualization, you need to understand what it's being used for, not just using it to make something pretty. And then, unfortunately, usefulness doesn't always equal buy-in. I can't tell you the amount of tools. It's probably a handful of tools that over the last 6 years at Nashville that we created that because. And personally, I probably messed it up. I messed up the pitch internally presenting it to a coach or a scout because that presentation wasn't thought through or planned in the right way or didn't go well. You really kind of lose that first impression in terms of having that tool be effective, even if it is the most useful tool you've built. So it's an important thing to really kind of cherish, I think, when you're building something inside a club. So sell the presentation. I try to do as much as possible in person. Obviously, it depends on your audience, but especially with coaches, I tend to try to do as much as possible in person. And package for the user. I'm not the first person to say this, but if someone has trouble and wears glasses, has trouble seeing, make the text bigger. If your coach doesn't use email, don't email them stuff. Text them stuff. WhatsApp them stuff. It's like obvious things, but I think it's important to remember it as you get in because it's very easy, and I've been there before. You kind of get lost in the whole system. And so after perform, lucky enough to kind of experience what decision making at a professional club looks like, and I certainly went in with a very data-centric mindset, but the reality is there's, clubs are decision-making machines in a very unstable environment with very tricky feedback loops. And so there's a lot of different components, I think, that go into decisions, and it's important for anyone that's trying to push data, utilize data, to just recognize all the different components that can go into it. So experience, intuition, whatever you want to call it, eye test, it's important to recognize that that's a seat at the table, and it can fill in gaps. And the data's gotten better, but using data on center backs way back when always scared the shit out of me, because it's just bad data. And so I think, there are experts at a club for a reason. They should help inform decisions and aggregate it all. Time is a huge one that I don't think gets talked about, and that there's two different kind of time elements. One is the time to make a decision. I can't tell you the amount of times that we've had a decision that we've had to make that I don't feel 100% certain about, but we have to make it, whether the market's moving on a player or whatever the case is. Sometimes you have to make decisions, and you have to weigh the information you have at that time, because you just have to make the decision. I remember in 2020, I got a call for the Walker Zimmerman trade, and the valuation and the amount they wanted, and I really had wanted to dig into it more, and we had some information, but we truly had to act on it right then and there, and it worked out. But I think those are real life situations. And then the other element of time, I think, is the time horizon that you're looking at, right? I think at Nashville SC, we can make two different decisions depending on what time horizon we're looking at, whether it's a short-term incentive or something that we're focused on the long term. Those time horizons are obviously important. Money, not just money for resource and what you can do, but what's your investment strategy, what's your risk appetite. If the club gives you $10 million but says they want to find an impact player, you're obviously going to kind of hone in on what type of profile that looks like, depending on what you have. This might be controversial, and I'm not saying that fans should dictate decisions, obviously, but fans are part of the business model. Fans come to watch games, they provide money to the club. It's important to make sure that you're considering fans as part of a decision. An example would be, we were opening up our new stadium, Geodis Park, kind of 2 years into the club's existence. It was important that we were making decisions that were going to put us in the best possible position to have fans sign up for season tickets, come to games, come to the stadium, be excited. It's important that they're considered as part of it. And then ownership, which is obvious, but I think something that needs to be considered. There needs to be alignment from ownership all the way down to the sporting team. Sometimes that can be trickier if there's not clarity, but decisions that you make at a club need to be aligned with ownership, whether you agree with them or not. It's their team. And so the last thing that I feel like has been resonates with me in terms of decision making at a club, and this might be a little lofty or like TED talky, but is kind of this framework for how humans make decisions. This is like a very it's probably the most analytical thing. It's a very Bayesian framework for how we make decisions, and it's something I was listening to a podcast called Hidden Brain. It was before I started with Nashville, and they talked about this. And so there's 4 factors that determine changing our beliefs: the prior belief, the confidence in that belief, new info, confidence in new info. The distance between 2 and 4 means more than the legitimacy of 1 and 3, which is a very, very scary thought, because you can present information, data, whatever it is that is better or should be influencing a change of a belief or a decision. But the reality is, if there is a lack of of confidence, or you haven't closed that confidence gap enough, it's just not going to do anything, right? So it's an important part of I always try to kind of think in my head when I'm presenting something or new information, how do I close that gap? And I would say the thing that tends to influence humans more than data is emotion, which sounds kind of contradictory to the use of data, because often we say like data is supposed to remove emotion, but I actually think when you're presenting data, the more that you can like elicit an emotional reaction, the more potential buy-in you're going to get. And that doesn't need to be creating excitement. Sometimes that can mean creating fear, what you're going to miss out on if you don't listen to the data or you don't involve it in your decision-making process. So I think there's different ways to approach it, but I do think this idea that we're removing emotion with data, I think it's all fine and fair, but the reality is when you're presenting data to a human being that already has a certain emotional confidence to a belief, especially in sports, I think you need to kind of recognize that the only way to kind of attack that is fighting emotion with emotion. And so questions I come back to, just do I understand how the data was created? Can I learn more about who it's for? What else exists in the decision-making process? And how can I close that confidence gap? There we go, 17 minutes. I was worried. We have time for questions and answers.